So back in 2023, Egypt decided to apply this 10% entertainment and amusement tax to the diving industry,
Right, yeah.
which is basically treating one of the world's most spectacular marine environments the exact same way you treat like a movie theater or a bowling alley.
Exactly.
But fast forward to 2026, and the Egyptian government is aggressively pivoting. They are now trying to treat the Red Sea not as a theme park, but as this heavily restricted, highly fragile marine sanctuary.
It's honestly a massive institutional identity crisis.
Yeah?
We're watching a destination try to just fundamentally rewire its relationship with tourism, and they're doing it in real time. And whenever a shift of that magnitude happens, I mean, it creates a tremendous amount of friction for the people who are actually visiting.
Which is exactly why you need to be paying attention if you're packing your gear for Egypt anytime soon. So today we're taking a deep dive into the sweeping policy shifts that are currently overhauling the Red Sea.
And we've got a lot of ground to cover.
We really do. We've pulled together this massive stack of sources for you. We've got official government mandates, dive industry reporting, and on-the-ground travel agency updates from earlier this year.
Right, to give you the full picture.
Exactly. Our mission today is to decode all these overlapping 2026 updates so you can accurately budget for your trip, choose an operator who, won't get shut down mid-vacation, and honestly, just avoid a massive headache when you land. Okay, let's unpack this, starting right at the top with what the Ministry of Tourism is actually trying to do.
Right, because to understand the changes happening out on the boat, we first have to look at the paperwork happening back in the capital.
Makes sense.
So in April of 2026, Egypt's Ministry of Tourism and Antiquities, this is under the leadership of Minister Sheikh, they released a major policy announcement.
Okay, and what's the core of it?
The directive is to completely review and modernize the whole regulatory framework for all diving and marine tourism. The stated goal, at least on paper, is to align Egypt with international best practices, regarding safety, government oversight, and environmental protection.
See, when I read through those announcements, my first thought was just about the sheer volume of tourists. I mean, places like Hurghada and Sharm el-Sheikh, they aren't hidden gems anymore.
Yeah, not at all.
They're basically industrial-scale tourism machines. So is the government essentially looking at the physical damage being done to these reefs and deciding, okay, we have to transition from this sort of Wild West, free-for-all playground into a strictly managed national park?
That's a great way to frame it, yeah. Historically, a lot of the enforcement in the Red Sea was just left to the operators themselves.
Like an honor system.
Exactly. The Chamber of Diving and Water Sports issued guidelines, but daily compliance was largely just, a matter of honor. What Minister Fathi's April announcement signals is the absolute end of that era.
Wow, okay. So what does modernizing the framework actually mean in practice then? Because a lot of government announcements are just heavy on buzzwords and really light on actual enforceable laws.
Well, the government is stepping in to mandate physical inspections now. They're requiring standardized staff training, they're enforcing diver-to-guide ratios, and strictly monitoring reef protection protocols.
Oh, so they are really cracking down.
They are. They're trying to establish a baseline where every single operator is legally accountable for both the safety of the diver and the preservation of the reef.
But wait. The sources keep referring to 2026 as a transition year?
Right.
To me, that sounds like a very diplomatic, bureaucratic way of saying, nobody actually knows what the rules are yet. If I'm booking a trip for next month, am I just going to be a guinea pig for half-finished regulations?
That is a very fair concern.
Are operators actually being penalized right now, or is this just a warning shot?
So a transition year means the overarching policy has been decreed, but the granular, itemized penalty structures, they're still catching up. You aren't a guinea pig, but you are entering an environment where operators are highly stressed out.
Because they know the government is watching.
Exactly. They know the audits are coming. They know their licenses are suddenly contingent on proving they're environmentally responsible. So as a diver, you're going to see a really noticeable shift in behavior.
Like what, specifically?
Well, dive guides are going to be much stricter during safety briefings. Boat captains are going to be incredibly careful about where and how they moor their vessels, so they don't accidentally drop anchors on coral.
Oh, sure.
The casual, relaxed attitude of the past is absolutely being replaced by a culture of strict compliance.
Which makes sense. If an operator loses their newly modernized license, their entire business just evaporates overnight.
Overnight, yeah.
But all of these new safety audits and mandatory staff trainings and government inspections, all that costs money. The bureaucracy itself has a price tag.
It really does.
And I think that brings us to the part of the deep dive that you, the listener, are going to feel immediately, which is the hidden costs. Because it turns out funding a marine sanctuary is incredibly expensive.
Oh, absolutely. And the way that cost is being passed down to the traveler is creating this deeply complex financial reality. We're looking at a billing structure in 2026 that is, frankly, just confusing.
Yeah, driven by that bizarre combination of taxes and environmental fees we mentioned at the start of the show.
Exactly. What's fascinating here is how it comes down to bureaucratic definitions of commerce.
Let's get into the mechanics of that, actually, because the whole entertainment and amusement tax thing genuinely baffles me. How on earth did scuba diving get lumped into the exact same tax bracket as a roller coaster?
Right. So back in mid-July of 2023, the Ministry of Finance needed to broaden its tax base.
Hmm.
They looked at the massive revenues generated by the diving industry and essentially categorized it as a leisure activity. So they slapped a 10% tax on the gross cost of the service. But now, here in 2026, the Ministry of Environment is simultaneously pushing its own agenda to protect the reefs.
Right.
So they've introduced a completely separate tier system of marine park, rec, and environmental fees.
Wait, so just to be clear, the government is taxing you 10% because diving is a fun game, but then they're also charging you an environmental fee because diving is a serious ecological privilege.
That is exactly the paradox, yeah. And the environmental fees aren't a flat rate either. They are entirely dependent on the specific geographical location of your dive site.
So how much is this actually going to cost me? Let's say I'm just doing some simple shore diving or, taking a day boat out of Hurghada. What does that look like compared to a massive expedition?
Okay, let's break down the tiers. If you're doing local dayboat dives in the standard zones, like the immediate coastal waters around Hurghada or Safaga, the environmental fee is relatively low.
Okay, how low?
You're looking at around €5 per diver per day. It's a pretty manageable surcharge, and it's designed to fund basic coastal patrols and mooring buoy maintenance.
Okay, €5 a day isn't going to break the bank. I can handle that. But what happens when you want to see the famous sites? The sources highlight places like Ras Mohammed and the wreck of the Fisselgorm up in the north, or Fury Shoals down south.
Right, that brings us to the second tier. When you move into those premium, highly sought-after areas, the fee jumps to roughly €10 per person per day.
Wow, okay, so they're practically putting surge pricing on the better reefs.
Pretty much. These zones experience intense daily boat traffic, so the government argues they require way more active management and environmental monitoring just to prevent total degradation.
That makes sense. And I imagine the really remote stuff is even more expensive.
Yeah, the highest tier is reserved for the remote offshore marine parks. We're talking about destinations like The Brothers, Daedalus, Elphinstone, Rocky Island, and Zeebrugge.
The bucket list spots.
Exactly. If your itinerary includes those sites, the fee hits around €15 per person per day.
For the listener who might not be super familiar with the local geography, why are those specific offshore sites so much more expensive to visit? Are the fish just prettier out there or what?
Well, it's mostly about the logistics of enforcement and just the extreme fragility of the environment. Sites like the Brothers or Elphinstone, they're essentially these underwater mountain pinnacles rising straight up from the deep ocean floor, miles and miles away from the coast.
Right.
They're famous for heavy currents and large pelagic sharks. Patrolling those really remote areas, maintaining safe moorings in deep water, and responding to emergencies out there, it just requires a completely different level of infrastructure from the government. So the €15 fee reflects the isolation of the park.
Okay, so let's do the math. If you're just staying at a resort and diving locally for 3 days, you might pay an extra 15 or 20 euros in fees. Not a deal breaker.
No.
But booking a live board under this new system seems entirely different. If I'm living on a boat for 7 days, balancing between these premium and offshore marine parks, what does that final bill actually look like?
Well, our industry sources indicate that for a standard 1-week live aboard, when you combine these daily park fees, the port departure fees, and that 10% entertainment tax, it can easily add 40 to 85 euros per person to your total bill.
Wow.
And the really big problem is that operators do not have a standardized way of presenting these costs to you.
This sounds exactly like flying a budget airline.
Yeah.
The base ticket advertised on the website looks incredibly cheap.
Yes.
But by the time you've paid to pick a seat, added a carry-on bag, and bought a bottle of water, your credit card is bleeding. You really have to look at the out-the-door price.
That is a perfect analogy. The accounting mechanisms behind the scenes are totally chaotic right now. Some dive centers include the 10% tax in their advertised base rate, but then they leave the daily marine park fees as this onboard cash
Oh,
surcharge.
I hate that.
Right. And other operators separate everything. So you book a €1,000 trip, only to be handed a surprise €150 invoice for taxes and reef supplements the literal moment you step onto the boat.
Which means the single most important thing you can do as a consumer is demand an itemized breakdown before you book. I mean, if package A is €50 cheaper than package B, you need to know if package A is just hiding the environmental fees in the fine print.
Exactly. You have to explicitly ask, are all taxes, port fees, and marine park supplements included in this quoted price? Because if you don't ask, you're really exposing yourself to the friction of this transition year.
Yeah, definitely. But here's where it gets really interesting, though. We are moving from talking about paying for conservation on paper to seeing what that conservation actually looks like when you're wearing a wetsuit.
Right, out in the water.
Because the government isn't just auditing the operator's finances. They are suddenly auditing how tourists interact with the wildlife. And our sources highlight this very specific high-profile incident from May 17th, 2026, that was published by the Egyptian Travel Agents Association.
Yes, the Mako shark incident. This was huge. The National Institute of Oceanography and Fisheries, or the NIA, they took the highly unusual step of issuing a formal, widely publicized condemnation regarding the mistreatment of a Mako shark by a group in the Red Sea.
See, when I saw that, I really had to stop and wonder about the underlying mechanics there. Why did a national scientific institute get involved in a single tourist boat encountering a shark? Like, what exactly were people doing that triggered a government response?
Well, to understand the severity of the reaction, you really have to understand the biology of a Mako shark.
Okay.
Unlike, say, a nurse shark, which can just rest on the sandy bottom and pump water over its gills, Makos are obligate ram ventilators.
Meaning they have to keep moving.
Exactly. They have to constantly swim forward to force oxygen-rich water over their gills just to breathe. They are incredibly fast open ocean predators. So when tourist boats try to corral them, or when divers chase them just to get a better photo for social media, it forces the shark to engage in evasive maneuvers that burn massive amounts of energy.
Oh, wow.
The stress of that can be lethal. The Institute stepped in because operators were treating a highly sensitive pelagic predator like a literal prop in an interactive zoo.
And the tolerance for that kind of behavior is just entirely gone
It's
now.
completely gone.
But I do have to ask the cynical question here. Is this sudden, super strict attitude about wildlife ethics driven by a genuine concern for marine biology? Or is this really just about the PR optics of keeping tourists safe?
Well,
Because in May of 2026, right around the time of this Mako incident, there were also multiple media reports about authorities tightening coastal safety measures following several shark sightings right near popular beaches.
if we connect this to the bigger picture, it is absolutely a dual mandate. And the thing is, the two issues are deeply interconnected through behavioral biology. The authorities are having to manage swimmer safety on the beaches and animal welfare out on the reefs simultaneously.
How do those two actually connect, practically speaking?
It comes down to habituation. In the past, some unscrupulous operators would throw chum in the water or use noise to attract sharks because, guaranteeing a shark sighting meant better reviews and higher tips from tourists.
Right.
But that artificial interaction teaches apex predators a very dangerous lesson. It teaches them to associate the sound of boat engines and the presence of humans with free food.
Oh, I see. So if a shark learns that a tourist boat equals a free meal out on the reef, it's eventually going to follow those boats closer and closer to the shallow coastal beaches where people are just, casually swimming.
Exactly. That is exactly the mechanism the government is trying to break. The National Institute of Oceanography condemning the mistreatment of the mako is a huge signal that the behavioral loop of wildlife tourism is under intense scrutiny now.
Yeah.
Feeding, chasing, or altering the natural behavior of marine life is no longer just frowned upon. It is viewed as a direct threat to the broader safety of the entire tourism industry.
Wow.
If a dive guide allows their group to harass a shark, they aren't just hurting the animal, they're jeopardizing the safety of the coastline and putting their newly modernized operator license at severe risk.
So, as a diver, your responsibilities have fundamentally changed.
Yeah.
You are expected to be a passive observer.
Yes.
If you're on a boat and the guide is trying to manhandle marine life to give you a better show, that is a massive red flag. You're a guest in a wild habitat, not a patron at an amusement park, regardless of what that 10% Ministry of Finance tax might be called.
The baseline for acceptable behavior has truly been completely reset.
It's just fascinating that the government is cracking down so hard on highly complex marine biology out on the water. Because if you look at how they're handling basic logistics on land, like simply moving these tourists through the airport, the grand vision of modernization completely falls apart.
Oh, yeah.
Let's leave the water for a minute and look at the actual logistics of arriving in Egypt.
The Digital Immigration Initiative. I mean, this is perhaps the most glaring example of the gap between policy announcements and on-the-ground execution in 2026.
Because back in January and March of 2026, multiple travel industry reports heralded this massive upgrade to Egypt's airport entry systems. The big, exciting headline was that they were officially abolishing those little paper immigration arrival cards.
Right.
You know, the ones. The flight attendants hand them out while you're trying to balance a tiny tray table. And you suddenly realize you don't know your hotel's zip code.
The stated policy was a complete transition to a streamlined digital processing system. The idea was that your entry clearance would be linked automatically to your passport data and airline manifests, just bypassing the physical paperwork entirely.
But the reality on the ground is completely different. Travelers flying into major Red Sea hubs, specifically places like Hurghada, they're reporting that they step off the plane and are immediately handed a paper immigration form.
Yep.
It is the ultimate illusion of digital convenience. It's exactly like checking in online for a flight, getting that sleek QR code on your phone, feeling super efficient, and then arriving at the airport only to be forced into a 45-minute line because the security gate still requires a physical printed boarding pass.
Right.
What is actually causing this bottleneck?
It is a classic IT infrastructure failure. While the central ministries in Cairo might have updated their databases to process digital arrivals, regional airports like Hurghada often lack the physical hardware at the border desks to instantly scan and verify that data for thousands of arriving tourists simultaneously.
That makes sense.
Furthermore, integrating the digital manifests from dozens of different international budget airlines into a single Egyptian security database, it just creates massive software friction.
So the central government says, we are fully digital, but the local immigration officer, who is staring at a line of 300 sunburned tourists and a computer that won't load, just says, please fill out the paper form.
That is the practical reality. The transition has begun, but it is deeply uneven. The most accurate way to prepare for arrival in 2026 is to just expect a hybrid system. Your data might be in the system somewhere, but the paper acts as a fail-safe for the local authorities.
Which means, as incredibly high-tech as modern dive computers and rebreathers have gotten, the single most important piece of equipment you can pack in your carry-on bag is a 50-cent ballpoint pen.
Definitely.
Don't be the person wandering the aisles of the airplane begging for a pen while everyone else is filling out their arrival card and getting a head start on the immigration line.
It sounds trivial, I know, but acknowledging that implementation gap and coming prepared will save you an immense amount of frustration before your vacation even starts.
Absolutely. So what does this all mean for you? If we synthesize everything we've pulled from these sources, the ambitious ministry announcements, the complicated fee structures, the strict new wildlife ethics, and the clunky airport realities, what's the ultimate takeaway here?
Yeah.
To me, it's clear that the Red Sea is still one of the most remarkable world-class diving destinations on the planet. But the days of just showing up, throwing some cash at a local boat, and doing whatever you want, those are over. The destination is fundamentally more regulated, significantly more expensive, and explicitly focused on environmental preservation.
Very true.
You have to demand pricing transparency up front. You have to actively seek out operators who respect the biology of the reefs. And honestly, you just have to embrace the bureaucratic bumps along the way.
It requires a major paradigm shift from the tourist. You are no longer just buying a vacation, you are directly funding a conservation effort. And that brings up a deeply complex dilemma to leave you with.
So let's hear it.
We've discussed how these costs stack up. You know, the 10% entertainment tax, the €15 daily offshore fees, the expensive new licensing audits for the boats. If this financial pressure continues to squeeze out the smaller, budget-friendly operators, will world-class diving in the Red Sea eventually become an exclusive luxury, gated off and reserved only for the wealthy?
That's a tough question.
Or is pricing the average tourist out of the water simply the necessary, unavoidable cost we must pay to ensure these fragile ecosystems aren't loved to death and actually survive for the next generation?